If I can be completely honest with you, there's some weeks where it's just a little more difficult to do a show. And this is one of those weeks. Welcome to No Alter Egos. It's the place for conversation without the mask. I'm your host, Trll Kennedy. We're broadcast every Monday live at 2 p.m. on WHPB 98.5 The Wire here in Pine Hills, Florida, as well as WUVS 103.7 The Beat in Muskegon, Michigan. We also have a Tuesday 3 p.m. rebroadcast, just in case you missed the Monday live broadcast, on WVBH LP Power 105.3 in Benton Harbor, Michigan. And just in case you missed all three, our YouTube companion video releases every Tuesday at 5 p.m. on the No Alter Egos YouTube channel. As I said earlier, I'm your host, Trll Kennedy. I can be found online on Instagram at Trll Kennedy with no I, so just TRLLKENNEDY, as well as on TikTok at Trll_Kennedy. You can find the show on Instagram and Facebook under the at No Alter Egos handle. And now that we have the formalities out of the way, we have, as I said in the intro clip, it's hard some weeks to do this show just because there's some weeks, man, when some stuff happens, you don't even want to talk about it. You don't want to sit up and get in front of people and act like everything is okay and let's talk our way through this. And this week is tough. I've spoken about it before on the show, right? Making this show is not nearly as easy as it seems, only in the sense that it's a one-man team. I do the editing, I do the research, I pull it up, I shoot, I record, I edit the audio as well as the video and send it off. And one of the tough things about doing that is that I don't always get to do, the difference between this and a live show is that there are times, especially in the 24-hour news cycle, where there's something that happens that I'm not able to capture immediately because I'm usually recording this over the weekend, usually on the Sunday before it airs. And so there may be stuff that happens, whether it's over Sunday night, something that even happens on Monday that sometimes completely recontextualizes or changes what it is that I was speaking about. For example, a few weeks back, I remember that I was speaking about Elon Musk offering to buy Twitter. And in the middle of me editing and releasing it, it came out that the deal had gone through. And so that's one of those things where it's like you make the show, you put time into it, but because the news cycle is constantly moving, there may be times where I'm not able to capture what exactly is happening in the moment that week. I may have a slightly different perspective on things because, once again, it's being recorded in the past. There's the other situation that I'll face as a creator as well, right? Which is that I'll make the show and I'll be putting it together. And in the middle of me putting the show together, something happens that completely throws off whatever it was that I had planned on speaking about or whatever it was that I was speaking about. Because this week, after I prepped this show, and I still do plan on speaking about especially the main topic I was going to talk on today, which had to do with Young Thug, Gunna, and the YSL crew, a chunk of them, getting arrested this past week on Georgia RICO charges. So these aren't the federal RICO charges, which at this point are a bit laughable. They don't get enforced nearly as much as we think they do, but states have adopted their own forms and versions of RICO. And the story I was going to touch on this week was how, for black artists especially, if they put out like street music or music that is the voice of the streets, that's talking about what's going on in the streets, they are not allowed their First Amendment rights. Right? That was one of those big things I was going to speak about, is how artists have their lyrics used against them in courts and how that's an egregious violation of the First Amendment and the artistic and just human right to freedom of speech and expression. And yet here we are. I'm recording the show and I can't talk about that immediately because over this weekend, there were multiple mass shootings again here in our country. And I talk about them because we can't ignore them. It's not something that you just ignore. The people that died in Buffalo, they didn't have a chance to ignore the horror that they went through this past Saturday. And as I said, that's one of those tough things about making this show, is that there's times where I'll have a hot button issue that I'm like, yo, we need to talk about this. And then in the middle of all that, it's like someone comes in, just throws everything off the table. Because how can I not speak about the victims of the Buffalo shooting? In fact, mass shootings are so common in this country that as I'm recording this episode right now, There's a shooting that's taken place at a church in Southern California. Now, we still don't even know, I still don't even know the full details in terms of what happened, if anyone has died, because it's unfolding in real time. You guys are going to hear this on Monday and Tuesday. You're going to see it on Tuesday. But that's how often the mass shootings happen in this country. It's just because we don't hear about them on the news all the time. But if I wanted to, every single week, every week that I make this show, I could talk about a mass shooting that happened around the country that week, because they happen at a clip of about one a day in our country. And what I think bothers me the most about this Buffalo shooting, it's the dark irony. Here I was getting ready to talk about how black artists, especially successful black artists, aren't allowed the same protections of free speech under the First Amendment that the general public is allowed to. You know, they don't have that same freedom of expression. They can't put things in their lyrics because the feds watch them, and then they try and do things like what's happening to Young Thug and YSL, which is to say they bring these charges. And I'm getting into the whole host of reasons why that cycle even starts. But before I have to get into that, as I said, I have to talk about this Buffalo shooting. And I have to talk about it because even though I'm getting ready to talk to you guys about the lack of freedom of speech suffered by these black artists, here's this young man who, through the miracle of free speech, especially when it comes to white supremacists and bigots and violent racists in this country, is so dearly and preciously protected that this young man made a violent threat to shoot up not his whole school, but to shoot some classmates before graduation last year. This is in June, July of 2021. He was known to his local police department for having made those terroristic threats that he was going to kill classmates. They had a chance to look deeper into him then, and they just dismissed it as nothing. Because if he hasn't taken the action, then there's nothing that they can do, right? And so here we have this young man who, even after doing that, one of the first things that law enforcement came out and said was that he was not known to law enforcement. They lied immediately in the aftermath and wake of this shooting. And I'm sorry if I'm just jumping into it, because usually I'll just jump into, I'll give the shout out to Born Sane, and I have this little structure that I try and follow, but I have to follow my heart today because my heart is broken. It's broken. And I don't, as I said, it's tough to come on the radio every week, man. It's tough to come on the radio. I'm not even talking about workload, but when you want to talk about the things that you're passionate about, when you see suffering and pain inside of this country and it goes routinely not only unaddressed, but people act as though there's nothing that we can do. And yet this young man who, as I said, was known to law enforcement, they came out and lied immediately in the aftermath of this heinous act, saying that, he was unknown to us. But he posted the manifesto days before the shooting took place. He was scoping the place out for at least a week before the shooting. And he stood out like a sore thumb because it was a predominantly black neighborhood that he went to. And then not only that, he shows up to this place after scoping it out, having posted this manifesto. It literally is a white supremacist manifesto online. And then live streams this massacre on Twitch. As I'm talking to you guys, as I'm recording this is before, this is not a live show. As I'm talking to you guys about this, there's another shooting that's taken place in a Southern California church. And I hadn't even made mention of the fact that there were several overnight shootings in the city of Milwaukee that left 3 people dead. Like, we can choose to ignore these things if we want to, right? But at a certain point, it's going to cause the decay and destruction of this society. We can't ignore these things. My heart is broken right now. We don't even have, or I should say, I don't even have the full names or the full list of names of all the victims yet. I've gotten 7 of them, and I want to take some time to remember those whose names I have now. I will not name the shooter. I won't give that person any kind of undue glory or credit because he deserves none of it. He's a worm. He deserves to die and rot in prison. This is madness, man. This is one of those weeks where it's really difficult to try and do a show. Because what do you do? What can we do? Guns are a Pandora's box. White supremacy is a Pandora's box. I think of the dark irony between these two facts that exist in our world right now. Right this very second, Young Thug is sitting down inside of a prison cell, hoping to get out. Right? Charged with being a part of this large criminal organization responsible, and this is in the words of the DA that did the large bust, responsible for a large chunk of the violent street crime taking place in Atlanta. That's what they claim this record label is doing, right? And at the same time, the KKK and other neo-Nazi and white supremacist organizations exist. They can have parades and marches, and they've expressly stated their desire to commit genocide on non-white peoples. And the federal government has never and will never really take it seriously because that's their peoples. The feds aren't going to pursue the KKK or any of these other neo-Nazi organizations because they don't represent a threat to the order, and they more than likely, I guarantee you with a high chance of likelihood, there are federal agents right now who have either former friends or relatives, whatever they want to call it, to distance themselves, but they have people that they know that are involved in these organizations. And they never pursue them with the same kind of fervor that they pursue a black artist that they claim is running a criminal enterprise because of his lyrics. And yet, you have these young men, these white young men especially, that will go into these forums on the internet and steep themselves deeply in a culture of hatred and fear and resentment to the point where they develop murderous rage. And then they go out and they act on that murderous rage, killing innocent people. And they are not seen as the same great level of threat to society than a black artist making black music about what's going on in the streets. It's always, they can never apprehend them early. They can never get them off the streets. It's always wait until they commit the atrocity, take them in gently, and call it evil. Because when you call it evil, that strips it of all the systemic surroundings that enable it to happen, right? It makes it seem as though you can't predict this kind of thing. Even though it's something that has now happened with a bit of regularity in our country, where white supremacists, and it's not even in our country, it's around the world, where white supremacists will post manifestos and go on murderous shooting sprees. It's almost like they're trying to one-up each other. And every single time, the cops will come out and say some nonsense like the Buffalo Department, which has killed black people for years, would say, which is that, oh, he was not known to law enforcement beforehand, which was a lie. He was. And then they call it pure evil, which strips them of any kind of responsibility for the fact that not only was he known to you guys, he was known to you guys because he was threatening to kill people, and nothing was done about it. And in these other cases, you have plenty of times where people are online and they're posting these things for others to see, like, yo, I'm gonna do this, I'm gonna do this. And none of them get taken off the streets until they commit the act. Because until then, it's just words. And in this country that seems so willing to fight for and protect free speech for murderous white supremacists, it can't be afforded to a YSL. I'm going to get to that shortly, though. Let's get back to Buffalo, because to be honest with you, I don't want to bring the two stories together too much. I'm just using one to point and highlight the flaws. And I wouldn't even say it's flaws because it seems very deliberately built in at this point in time. But I'm just using it to kind of point out the hypocrisy inside of the system, especially when it comes to the way that they deal with white murderers versus black artists and rappers, right? So here we are in this situation now where this young man has gotten to post his manifesto. He's been stalking the place out for a week. No one's still done a thing about it. And come Saturday, 13 people, lives forever changed. I believe they said it was 11 black people that he shot, 2 white people. And it was so racially motivated that as he was walking through the store, he came across a white man who screamed for his life in fear. And he apologized to the white dude before moving on and shooting other black people. As I said, man, and I know why they do this kind of stuff. I personally, I still refuse to allow myself to get caught up in the insanity of it all. But this won't stand forever. I'm putting that out there. This won't last and stand forever in this country. It's either going to lead to collapse or they're going to do something about it, because you cannot run and sustain a society for the long term with these kind of symptoms, with these kind of things going on. And I just want to take some time right now to acknowledge the victims of this heinous shooting, which once again, as I said, totally derailed my plans for this show. I didn't plan on starting off the show like this. I wanted to jump into some other inequities in the system, but certainly not point and highlight how those inequities can lead to and enable white supremacists to commit acts of mass terror and murder and be arrested scratch-free by the police, apprehended without incident. And yet they kicked the doors down. Like I said, I was going to point out certain ones, but wasn't expecting to have to talk about this because why would why would you? Those people didn't wake up yesterday thinking that there was going to be their last days and moments on earth. They didn't. And they deserved so much better than the end that they received. To be names now that I'm going to have to try and read and memorialize and let you guys know about, like, their lives were fuller than that, man. These were human beings, lifetimes worth of memories, lives touched and changed. A deacon at the local church, a civil rights legend and writer. Like, these... If you hear me breathing and sighing a lot, it's because it's just a lot to try and take in. It's a lot to try and think about. It's a lot. It really is a lot. But I want to give those who unfortunately lost their lives in this horrible, horrible incident at least some love. And as I said, I don't have, it's still so fresh, I don't have all the names. And there's another shooting that has unfolded in Southern California. So who knows how bad that one is. I'm sure by the time this airs, we'll definitely have a lot more information. That's how fluid everything kind of happens. Mass shootings happen really regularly here in our country. So who were the victims of this shooting? As I said, I want to give them a chance to at least have a small sliver of their stories heard. And I know that we're going to learn more about them over the coming days and weeks, unfortunately, in light of this situation. But I want to give some love first and foremost to the man who tried to be a hero in this situation. And that's retired/former police officer Aaron Salter. He attempted to shoot. He was the store's security guard, and he actually attempted to shoot the shooter when he first came in. Unfortunately, though, the shooter was wearing body armor. So although he was struck several times, he was not injured. He, of course, immediately turned upon Salter, returned fire, and killed him in the store as well. But to former Officer Salter, to Mr. Salter, thank you. Thank you for selflessly thinking of others in this moment during the last and some of the worst moments of your life. You still thought of others. You still tried to do something to put a stop to the situation. And I want to just acknowledge that right now, because while it didn't end the shooting, I'm sure it put some fear in the shooter's heart, and maybe it gave some others a little more time to escape. And that's why I want to give credit, because he was the first one to try and act in this situation to really stop the shooter in a lethal way. And while he did not succeed, as I said, his actions, I'm sure, saved the lives of others who were given a chance and an opportunity to escape had he not taken those shots. So to Officer Salter, thank you so much for thinking of others during those moments. And rest in peace to you, sir. Victim number 2, and this is not in the order that they were killed or anything like that. This is just me writing down some information that I could learn about them and going from that. But Ruth Whitfield, the mother of former Buffalo Fire Commissioner Garnell Whitfield, who had just visited her husband in a nursing home and stopped by the grocery store to pick up a few things. Last moments of her life. Thanks to a host of factors, but to Miss Whitfield, rest in peace, ma'am. I'm sorry that this was, this was so senseless, man. So senseless. Had to get myself together. To victim number 3, Miss Pearlie Young, who ran a food pantry in the Central Park area of that Buffalo community and fed people at that food pantry every Saturday for 25 plus years. Miss Young, rest in peace. My hope is that there will be another community leader that can step up in her place now. But she's been stolen from the community. So rest in peace to you, Miss Young. And, you know, man, as I read through this victims list, older black folks, older black women who were doing good things in the community and are dead now because law enforcement in this country at the federal, state, and local levels not only refuse to take white supremacy seriously, there are white supremacists inside of those organizations. There are. And we need to stop lying and playing and pretending. That's why these things are allowed to happen. That's why these guys have their safe havens on the internet where they can go and express these ideas and then act on them. And no one takes a second to intervene and say, yo, these guys are talking about shooting people up. I guarantee you, if these were Islamic forums and they were talking about doing this, mass arrests would be made. But no. Victim number 4, Miss Catherine Massey. Known for her work during the civil rights, used to write for the Buffalo News. In her 70s, a beautiful soul in person. Gone, snatched, killed by a dog, by this low-life nothing. Gone now. Deacon Haywood Patterson, victim number 5, a deacon at the local church who was famous in the local area for giving people rides to that grocery store. People who didn't have transportation, he would give them rides to go get food and their groceries. That was his act of service as a leader of the church to the community. And he's gone now because, once again, of this low-life animal that was allowed to travel, I believe it was 200 miles or so from his actual hometown to come there to commit this heinous atrocity. Deacon Patterson is now gone. Victim number 6, Celestine Chaney, a cancer survivor, a beloved grandmother, gone. Once again, and these names that I'm reading off, as I said, mostly older black women and black folks. Like, I won't get too wrapped up in it because we do have a show to do. But it sucks, man. It's like reading off a list of beloved grandparents or relatives, all snatched from this earth. Because there is no because we live in a country that would rather allow madness to rule the day and would rather allow racists to be able to commit acts of murder before they stop and try and stop these things in their tracks. They'll watch Muslims. They'll watch those forums. If you black and you make music and you make money doing it and you talk about any kind of street life, they'll watch you. They'll watch you for years. They'll dedicate years of resources. But if you're a white person that says, yo, I want to kill a bunch of people, especially those N-words, if you do that, if you do that, like a fly on the wall just buzzing away, it's nothing. Whatever, we'll go away. And then victim number 7, who I actually believe was the literal first victim of this shooting, Roberta Drury, age 32. Had just come back home to her mom, was out getting some groceries, was the first person this dog encountered in the parking lot. And he live streamed her murder for the world to see on his Twitch channel. At a certain point, we have to I refuse to accept this as normal. You know, I talk about it all the time. There's this dark lottery that gets played every single day in this country, right? There's 2 of them. There's several. One that is mostly thought of by black people, minorities in this country, and one that really affects everyone in our country. Of course, the first one is you're thinking about police brutality and how, as a black person, Hispanic person, Native American, whatever the case may be, any and every day that you don't encounter a police officer or a law enforcement officer is a great day in your life. That means that either you didn't have to go through something bad and call the cops, or you didn't get pulled over and have a potentially violent encounter with the police. But either way, any day you don't encounter a cop is a great day. Because there's always that dark lottery you play where, am I going to be someone that ends up as a nameless victim? Because even though I talk about the victims of police brutality and police violence, we don't know, and there is no real way to know all of those victims because there's no real database that's kept federally. Shootings are mostly justified because the justification relies on the police reports from officers and their fellow officers. And so, like I said, as a black person, that's that one dark lottery. Like, I don't want to come across the wrong police officer at all today. I don't really want to encounter them, but especially not the wrong one, because you don't want to end up a hashtag. And so there's that dark lottery that's out there, right? But then there's this other dark lottery. And as I said, this affects everyone, which it boggles my mind that, like, it affects white people too. It affects black people, white people, Asian, whatever the case may be. It doesn't matter how you look. Unless, of course, you're dealing with someone who, in the case of the Buffalo shooting or a Dylan Roof type situation, the shooting in South Carolina, you know, if you're dealing with one of those cases, then yes, it does apply to you specifically based on the color of your skin. But generally, mass shootings, they take place, and they take place to everyone here in our country. And that's the other dark lottery, that as much as we pretend as there is this large amount of success on offer here in America, and look at all the things you can do, there's a dark undercurrent. If you're an American, every single day, you go out there with the chance that maybe, just maybe, a madman's gonna come to whatever location I'm at publicly and open fire. That's something that every American citizen, child all the way through adult, has to have running in the undercurrent of their subconscious mind. That's the other dark lottery that gets played, is the fact that every single day when you go out to a public space, there's a chance that you could end up on the news as the victim of a mass shooting. And so you have to constantly be on the lookout whenever you're out in public, whether you're grocery shopping or at Lowe's or whatever the case may be. You have to be constantly vigilant, because you know that if you go out in public, there's a chance. And so you have to just be aware of it. I speak about these things not because I want to get people riled up and upset, but I speak about them because we can't ignore them. Because you're not allowed to ignore it. If you run across a bad police officer as a black person, you can't just, I'm gonna snap my fingers and the situation's over. No, like, you gotta navigate that thing dearly so you can keep your life. If you're out somewhere and a mass shooting breaks out, you gotta be thinking clearly about, how can I escape? How can I escape with my life? But we ignore these things because if it doesn't happen to you every day, it doesn't happen to you, you think maybe it can't. But then we're always reminded, because mass shootings happen regularly inside of our country, we're always reminded that if you go somewhere publicly in this nation, you could die. That could be your last day on earth just for going out and getting groceries, going to the barbershop, wanting to pick up stuff for a birthday party, whatever the case may be. Any reason that you have to be out in public, you're putting yourself in the crosshairs potential of a violent white supremacist or some kind of violent shooter online who's been planning an attack and lives nearby or doesn't live nearby. Because the people in Buffalo, this kid drove several hundred miles to go commit this shooting. Like, it's not a sustainable form of running a society, and they can keep kicking the can all they want to. There's going to be a reckoning at some point in time that's hard to ignore. And I, for one, I'm disgusted. I'm heartbroken. But I know it's also par for the course inside of our country. I think that's the saddest part, is that it's not abnormal. It's not the first or the second or the third or the 10th or the 50th or the 100th time this has happened. There have been over 120 mass shootings already this year, 2022. And to be honest, man, as I said at the start of this, it's a Pandora's box. There's too many guns on the streets. There's too much. There's already too much that's happened. But to each of the victims, and I don't have all of their names yet, so maybe next week I can give a full and comprehensive rundown of these unfortunate and sweet souls that lost their lives at the hands of this low-life inhuman. I'll have that full list, but for now, the 7 names that I do have. And there's also this young man, Goodman, who I believe survived a shot to the neck, so I'm grateful that he's still alive. But it's just, it's one of those days, man, where it's tough. It's tough to just try and create, whether you want to call it content or just a conversation. And that's what these usually are. I know we don't have a chance to interact live, but for me, I'm sharing those things that I'm passionate about and that I hope others are passionate about too. Because we can't see change if we don't make ourselves aware of what's going on, right? But this is one of those weeks where it's just tough. It's tough to try and foster any conversation. It's tough to be anything other than heartbroken and angry and disturbed. And yet we still all have lives to live. we still all have things that we need to do. But rest in peace to every single one of the Buffalo victims, the victims of that horrible mass shooting in Buffalo. I'll probably have more information next week about the shooting that took place at the church in Southern California. But at this moment in time, all I have to offer is heartbreaking condolences and hopes for the future that it'll be better. But based on the current actions by the current administration and foreseeable administrations into the near future, I just don't see it. And I'm not saying that to be pessimistic. I'm just being realistic about the kind of people that run this nation. But it won't be like this forever, and I take solace in that. We're going to keep things moving, though, here on No Alter Egos, so stick around. So our main story today, all that craziness from the weekend aside, was actually free speech, or the lack of free speech that's afforded, especially to successful black artists that maybe portray a street lifestyle, talk about shooting and stuff like that in their music. And I want to preface this by saying, I know that it's easy to go out and say, well, you put out certain things, what do you expect? But I want us to be very clear that in our country, there's a ton of speech protected under the First Amendment, up to and including, I believe, incitement to violence or direct threat of violence aren't protected forms of speech. But you can say, I hate these people, do all that, whatever the case may be. There's all types. There's all types of speech that's protected under the First Amendment. Sometimes really heinous stuff that you think shouldn't be, but is. But there's a wide swath of speech protected by our First Amendment here in America. And I know that one of the first things people are going to say is, well, you know, they were talking about this and they make the kind of music that really brings the black community down. And I just want to be very clear. I don't always agree with some of the subject matter in street music, but I personally, I'm not going to sit there and tell them you can't make that music, because I can't dictate to someone else what their truth is or should be. I'm not Fox News. You know, at the end of the day, even if I feel as though, you know, talking about shooting and killing, all that in the music, like, I do feel sometimes it can be a bit harmful, but at the same time, like, I'm not going to sit there and tell you how you're supposed to make your money. And if people are listening to the music, if there are people that are relating to the music because this is what they go through, more power to you. So I want to get that out of the way. 1, the First Amendment protects a ton of speech. 2, even if you disagree with the subject matter of a Young Thug, or insert any black artist here that speaks about street life, street violence, whatever the case may be in their music and is successful at it. Like, I can't tell another person how to get their money, even if I believe there are certain elements that may be more harmful than good to our community. At the end of the day, this is another black person making it, and short of them being a black serial killer or something like that, like, as long as you're not out here doing no really ridiculous mess a la R. Kelly or whatever the case may be, like, I'm gonna try and support you as a black person getting your coin, especially when you're someone like a Young Thug and YSL that gives back to their community as well. But I've found through the years now, and I'm glad that I've been around long enough to notice the patterns that go on. And I wanted to break down how and why free speech has been under assault, especially for black people, black artists, for far longer than we've ever admitted, and especially when it comes to powerful black people that are successful, especially within the music and artistic community. They're not afforded the same free speech that everyone else is. Constantly now, if you've paid attention through the years, we've seen as like YNW Melly, Tay-K, Young Boy, all these artists, Boosie, every one of them. And I'm not sitting here to say that they're guilty or innocent, whatever the case may be. But over the years now, we've seen case after case where the feds or local law enforcement, state law enforcement, whoever has been watching a particular black artist decides to use their lyrics, and the DAs that handle these cases that prosecute decide to use an artist's lyrics to say, hey, these lyrics are akin to a confession of guilt. And to be honest with you, I can't even begin to tell you what an astounding, not only violation of the First Amendment it is to take someone's lyrical and artistic creation and say that this is tantamount to a confession of guilt, but then to actually use it in court and to have found some success with it. It blows my mind. But then again, no, it doesn't. It should blow my mind, but it doesn't, because it falls right in line with the pattern of second-class citizenship or third-class citizenship that they try and afford to black people here in America. Even our First Amendment rights aren't the same as everyone else's. So what do I mean when I say this? If you've ever listened to like death metal or black metal, really hard, heavy music, really violent, disturbing stuff when you talk about lyrical content. In fact, I wanted to go through, because here's one of the things, and there's a whole host of factors that go into why these prosecutors would even attempt to use these tactics in the first place. See, there's an entire game and system around the whole thing. It's essentially a throw as much crap as you can at the wall kind of scenario and see what sticks. And moreover, if you can use racist stereotypes and social tropes, all the better. And I say all that, once again, in reference to like death metal and black metal, to highlight that whenever there's some kind of violent incident or gory scene that takes place, or anything like that, there are no death metal artists that are held accountable or said, oh, these lyrics can be something. They're never investigated for them. But anytime it's a black artist that's talking about, and not in the same kind of violent and really very visually graphic terms that some of these death metal bands and other things, and I'm not using this, by the way, I just want to say this, when I'm talking about like death metal, black metal, whatever, I'm saying that people should have a right to express. Now, personally, it's not my vibes, but people should have an artistic right to express even transgressive and violent kind of impulses and urges. It's an outlet, a release for them, right? And I'm pointing this out to highlight that it's very much well understood, both by society as a whole, as well as law enforcement, that when it comes to an artist and their lyrics, they can't take them at face value and assign merit or truth to them and make them tantamount to a confession. For example, I'm just going to read through some death metal lyrics so we have a baseline of another genre of music that has really violent, really gross, disturbing lyrics, and yet artists in these subgenres and genres aren't under constant law enforcement scrutiny like mainstream rap artists that talk about street life are. So let's go to Cannibal Corpse from their 1994 song. I can't say this word on FCC airwaves, but F'd with a Knife. That's the name of the song. You can spell out the F word for yourself, but F'd with a Knife by Cannibal Corpse in 1994. I'm just going to read off some of these lyrics for you guys. Tied tight to the bed, legs spread open, bruised flesh, laceration, skin stained with blood. I'm the only one you love. I feel her heart beating, my knife deep inside. Her crotch is bleeding. Stick it in, rip the skin, carve and twist, torn flesh from behind. Those are lyrics. I don't need to read anymore because that's not the type of things I try and feed into my spirit anyways. I say all that to say this. I don't want to hear the BS arguments about violent lyrical content. I don't want to hear the nonsense about how, oh, they're putting out socially unacceptable things in their music. Because these metal bands and it's not just metal. Metal's not the only genre where this is happening. I'm once again just pointing something out, a case to highlight clearly how there is a known and accepted difference between artistic creative expression and the freedom of that expression, and how in certain genres they're allowed to do it, but not in others. That is the point here. I'm pointing this all out to say that there is a well-hewn line between creative and artistic expression in this country that is known to law enforcement and society at large. And yet and still, anytime you have a black artist or anything like that that talks about what's going on the block, maybe they talk about shootings, anything like that happens, it's brought against them as though somehow they're culpable and responsible for these events as well. And so what they do is they do like what they did to Thug and YSL. They'll sit and they'll watch you for years, hoping to try and connect you to different things. They've been watching Young Thug for at least 9 years. At least 9, because they have stuff dating back to 2013. 2014, 2015, they've been watching. And what they've been saying is these little random events. For example, that he rented a car in 2014 that was then used in a 2015 killing. Like, this is the kind of stuff that they're trying to put out there to the public as solid police and investigative work that they've spent almost 10 years, and this is what they've come up with. Look at his lyrics and look at some of these crimes and the similarity in the nature between his lyrics and these crimes. He had to have known they were going on. And I'm going to be here today to make the case really briefly that not only is the case against Thug, Gunna, and YSL complete nonsense and BS in terms of them trying to use their lyrics to try and tie them into crimes, but it's actually part of a larger pattern of behavior by law enforcement as well as district attorneys around the country as they work to throw young black successful artists in jail by tying them to crime through their lyrics. So we can look at several cases in point for this happening. If you look, Casanova was just held essentially in solitary until he made a plea. He essentially copped a plea to say that he was the leader of the Gorilla Stone Nation. And so now he's going to be sentenced. He was facing between 5 years and 60 years. That was the length of time. Either you get 5 years or 60. What kind of... nothing. Let me not even get into that. Casanova, one example. TK, currently sitting on a 55-year sentence, probably never going to get out. Use his lyrics from The Race and other songs to tie him into a crime. Now, TK, I can't speak to whether or not he did it. I'm going to say that one looks a little bit different to me. But at the same time, I'm just using this to point out how, once again, as I stated earlier, they throw a lot of crap at the wall and try and see what sticks. Because no matter what, it's twofold, right? So whether you're talking Casanova, TK, Bobby Shmurda, we talk about all these guys who they arrest and then they use their lyrics to get convictions, which is insane. It's asinine. It shouldn't be allowed, but it's happened. What happens is they set legal precedent. And so for the ones that maybe actually are involved in the criminal activity that they get the convictions on because of other evidence and not just the lyrical evidence, they're able to then say, aha, see, look, he was talking about it and he did it. To the majority of them that they just trap up in the system where you see them languish in jail for a little bit and then their attorneys get them out because there's no real evidence against them, which should show you how our justice system works. It's not just because they're rich that they're getting out. They still have to languish in jail for a little bit. But a lot of times these young men, they'll bring them in hoping that they can either break them by keeping them trapped up and locked away, or hoping that maybe by keeping them locked up, it'll give them more time to work because they feel as though maybe they're covering their tracks while they're out and free. But what they do is, for the ones that they do actually gain convictions on, it kind of bolsters their little argument as though like, yeah, like, look, we investigated him and he did it. And then to the vast majority of others, it feeds into the social stereotype of black criminality, even when you have money. Now, you mean to tell me Young Thug, after all these years and all this money he's been making, is still going to be involved in day-to-day street-level criminal activity? Are you trying to sell me a bridge that runs in Brooklyn too? You think I'm dumb enough to buy both stories from you? No, that's asinine. That is asinine on its face. But moreover, as I said, what happens is because they're able to take those few convictions that they do get, they can paint the rest of them with this broad brush of guiltiness. And they use, once again, social racist stereotypes and tropes about black men and inherent criminality, so that whenever you see a Young Thug get arrested, it's like, oh, well, that's what he talks about in his music. Oh, yeah, he must be guilty. Dang, the feds got him. They've been watching him on RICO for years. He's going away for a while. And it's like, no, like, these cases are nonsense, especially that first wave of whatever evidence they made available to the public. That is, I hope that's not the case. And to be honest with you, I'm positive there's probably more. Now, if there isn't, I'll be back to laugh at them later on whenever this case falls apart. But my hope would be that if you're going to bring them in and claim all these things, you have some actual hard evidence, because the stuff that I've seen, lyrical content and things like that, where you're trying to paint this man out as some kind of mafia boss, nah, not buying it. I refuse to actively participate in lynching by another way, in terms of stealing someone's life from them by crucifying them in the court of public opinion because you're relying on stereotypes and because this person makes a kind of music where the subject matter that they speak on is like, oh, well, you're talking about it, so, you know, you must be doing it. And it's like, no. Do I think that Young Thug is out here getting people knocked off and killed? Look, if he is, man, I would say, I don't know why. Don't get me wrong. You make enemies. But personally, I think there's a certain level of success that you reach that you realize that that kind of living is asinine. And I think Thug, Gunna, all them have been reached and past that. So I think that they're going to end up getting out. But once again, the more they do this, the more arrests they make, especially when they're trying to tie in lyrics to criminality, is the more they're able to keep doing it, because in the public mind and perception, it's like, dang, these guys must really be doing it. And look what they talk about in their songs. It's not strong enough. I smell a rat. I smell some BS. And most importantly, in a country that prides itself, it's the First Amendment to our Constitution, the right to free speech. For them to strip away that right from black artists and try and claim that it's in pursuit of criminal justice is laughable. But once again, the criminal justice system in this country, we all know where its foundations lie. I won't get into that because I've talked about it before. It's not necessarily even just beating a dead horse. It's that we're all aware of who the criminal justice system in this country serves, the outcomes that it prefers to get. And, until maybe 100 years from now, things will be slightly different. But until then, I'm not going to get my hopes up. I say all that to say that you, as people, don't be fooled. Don't allow them to pull in, because there's plenty of black people I know that will say, well, look, as a black person, look what you're talking about. What do you expect? But that's what they do to get us turned against us, too. Is we think respectability politics is what gets us there. But they've shown us time and time again that doesn't matter how respectable you think you are. If they can arrest Henry Louis Gates, a Harvard professor with tenure, at the front door of his home for just trying to get into his home, if they can arrest him, they will arrest you too. So that's why I don't even participate in respectability politics anymore. It's not to say that you don't want people to carry themselves with a certain level of dignity, sure. But that does not mean that they should have to act a certain way to be treated with basic respect and deference inside of our country. And so, yeah, man, I'm getting ready to jump into the wrap-up segments of the show because we're short on time. But I just wanted to make the short and brief case to you that the feds, state and local prosecutors, DAs, attorneys general, they work in tandem to try and bring down successful black men by throwing these BS charges at them and then going against their First Amendment rights by taking lyrics out of context and things like that, trying to apply it to different crimes and whatnot and assign culpability and guilt because they don't want to do their jobs properly. And moreover, we participate in it every single time we automatically assume guilt on the part of the parties they arrest. Personally, I believe Thug, Gunna, and YSL for the most part, because I can't speak for everyone in that organization. You never know what everyone is doing. But I do not think that with all the money this man, Young Thug, has made, with all the good that he does for the community, that he's been out there acting as some kind of de facto Don, calling hits on the street. This man is busy worrying about making high fashion and more money and incredible music. And yet, anytime he's arrested, we participate in it too, just as much as white folks, saying, well, what you expect? Your name is Young Thug. They was going to come get you inside. No, he's an artist. He's allowed to put out and portray a certain way of life. Moreover, at the end of the day, these song lyrics that they talk about literally is just the voice of the streets. It's literally just them talking about what happens and has been going on. And it cannot and should not be used in a court of law to try and assign guilt to any party. But we've seen it happen time and time again. My hope and belief is that in this case, it will fall apart, but they have gotten convictions before. And it's asinine that they have. And maybe at some point, hopefully in the not too distant future, we can revisit and vacate the lot of those convictions, any convictions that have ever been garnered with lyrical evidence. That is not evidence. That is protected speech under the First Amendment, artistic expression. People can say anything they want to in their lyrics, literally anything. I can say that I'm a fly to Dubai tomorrow and do a jig on top of the Burj Khalifa. You can say whatever you want to say in lyrics. That's the whole point. It's artistic freedom of expression. And yet we're seeing them getting ready to try and lynch another black man through the legal system because of the music he puts out and what they claim is inherent criminality inside of his lyrics. And me, and I hope you as well, I refuse to buy it any further. Do your jobs. Set Young Thug, Gunna, and the rest of YSL free, at least those who really haven't been doing anything. And let's move on with our lives and try and catch some real actual criminals, like the kids that go post online about wanting to kill people and then actually do it. How about we do that? How about we use taxpayer resources more wisely? I don't know, just a thought from me, but we're going to keep things moving here on No Alter Egos, so stick around. So this week, I started reading Davos, Man, How the Billionaires Devoured the World by Peter S. Goodman, a global economics correspondent for the New York Times. It essentially highlights how, not only through the pandemic, but even predating the pandemic, the billionaires of the world, using their accumulated money, have really rigged the system. But it goes into great lengths to explain each and every scenario about how what particular billionaire in which country worked to get which tax laws passed and which other laws passed to ensure that they can profiteer in almost any environment and situation. Whether we're talking about the pandemic and them working to make sure, especially in the pharmaceutical industry, that they could get massive kickbacks from governments as they were selling treatments. I'm talking hundreds of billions of dollars were made during the course of the pandemic between public funding that was pulled in to research vaccines, and then obviously large chunks of that fund also went to paying large executive bonuses and things like that. But it really does excellently detail how from years and years back now, the billionaires of the world have worked to systemically place laws, rules, and regulations into the favor of them and their business interests at the expense of the public money, and the overall greater public good. I still have to finish it, but it is a wonderful read so far, as I said, just detailing those steps and strategies in pretty good detail from every corner of the world, mind you, not just here in the US, but all around the world. So I'd highly recommend Davos Man by Peter S. Goodman. It's been a great read so far, and one that I think will really enlighten a lot of people to the mechanisms and machinations of how the richest people among us are able to not only get more money, but stay rich. The machinations by which they manipulate the laws of society to benefit themselves at the harm and expense of others in the public at large. Anyways, we're going to move on to our Tech Talk Minute before we wrap it up with our final thought here on No Alter Ego. So stick right around. This week for our Tech Talk Minute, I just wanted to really pay a touching tribute to a dear friend that we're losing as time and technology move forward. I learned this week that the iPod Touch and the iPod generally are being discontinued by Apple. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll be able to see, obviously if you're listening on the radio, you won't be able to see as much. But right now, I am holding up my old click wheel iPod. This bad boy has been with me since, I don't know, 03, 04 maybe, 18 years now. I need to plug it in. I'm pretty sure it still works. I plugged it in a few years ago. But obviously I have my phone now, and there are many reasons why the iPod is being discontinued. The chief among them is that many of its features have been replaced and placed inside of the iPhone. So it's not as though they need to continue to make and manufacture it as a separate device when all of its features are already inside of their flagship device, which is the iPhone. I understand it from a business standpoint, but I just wanted to take some time to say that the playlists that I made on my Clickwheel iPod have gotten me through some of the toughest moments of my life. And I'm grateful that Steve Jobs created and introduced this device to the market. It revolutionized the music industry, really democratized music in many ways, and took a ton of the power directly out of the hands of the labels. They've since kind of gotten back on their feet, but I say all that to say that there's a ton of memories wrapped up in that little black device. And while I'm sad to see it go, I understand why it's going, but I just wanted to take some time to give a huge shout out to the iPod for the years of memories. And I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels that way, but Apple did announce that they are discontinuing the iPod. From now on, you'll just have to deal with Apple Music on your iPhone, as many of us have been doing over the last maybe 8 to 10 years, really. Anyways, that's it for our Tech Talk Minute. We have our final thought coming up here on No Alter Egos. So the final thought this week, I'm not going to say it pains me that I even have to make it. I think it's important that I make this final thought this week. And it's especially if you live here in America. This final thought is going to apply to you, and it's going to be this. When you are out in a public place, keep your head on a swivel, stay alert, and be ready and prepared at all times to escape for your life. I hate that I have to say it, but it's a truth that we currently have to live with, and maybe we'll have to live with indefinitely. We can't ignore it. We can't just, because it's this bad thing that happens, we think it'll never happen to us. No. You have to be ready and prepared at all times for that worst of worst events here in America, the mass shooting, to take place. And I'm not sitting here to say that it's going to happen immediately or all the time, but I am here to say that the more aware you can make yourself out in public, just pay attention to your surroundings, things like that. It can help to save your life. And if I can help to save lives, I'm going to do that, because I'm sick and I'm sick and tired of hearing about all the death. It happens here in this civilization. It's part and parcel of everyday life. But I just want everyone to just be more aware when you are out in public, especially if you're black or minority in this country. Be aware of your surroundings. Don't take your life and your ability to just be out in public for granted so much that you move around thinking that it's the same for you out here. It's not. You have to be aware and move vigilantly and carefully, because that's just the nature of this country that we live in. Don't make yourself a hashtag. Pay attention to your surroundings. Go home safely to your families. As you go through this week, like I said, just be very aware of where you are in your surroundings at all times. And you can still show love to those around you too. It's an act of care to make sure that the others around you are safe. We saw several victims of this Buffalo shooting that did that and cost them their lives. But yeah, just go out there this week. Be aware, be vigilant, take care of yourselves. And as always, God bless.
Looking in the mirror, I know I'm imperfect, just like everybody else I know. Most times I wish the world looked beneath the surface, but I guess that's how life goes. Had to learn to love myself this time around. Pop a bottle and then take a sip just because. Book a flight and then take a trip just because. Love myself just because.